Kia ora, good evening. Last night there was another opportunity for Invercargill voters to meet the candidates and hear what they had to say on issues important to the seat of Invercargill ahead of the general election. The Council of Trade Union organised debate featured Green candidate Dave Kennedy, New Zealand First's Ria Bond, Labour's Leslie Soper and Carl Findlater representing Democrats for Social Credit leader Stephanie de Ruyter. Nationals' Sarah Dowie declined the invitation to participate. The next opportunity to put questions to the candidates is next Tuesday night at the National Council of Women meeting for candidates standing for the seats of Invercargill and Clutha Southland. Meanwhile, Labour's candidate for Invercargill, Leslie Soper, took the opportunity to vote early today at a special advanced voting booth. Many people have made advanced votes since the booth opened in the Crescent yesterday. As well as casting a vote, Ms Soper commented on yesterday's granting of $2 million by the government to help cover the funding shortfall of Stadium Southland. The candidate says it's not enough.
It's one of the big changes this election that anybody, for any reason, doesn't have to be any special reason, can cast an early vote. Now that's different from other years where it's had to be a special vote, but people can now come in early from the 3rd till the 19th to the special polling booths, and the one that's open in Invercargill the longest is this one at the Menzies building. It's going to be a couple of others, but they'll be open for shorter periods and they'll be well advertised. But people can come cast an early vote. It might be because they're working on election day, might be because they're out of town, might be because they're involved in sport. But the fact is, and why I'm voting early today, is to emphasise how important that democratic right is and to exercise that democratic right. I'm urging people, get out and have your say. The Electoral Commission's actually made it earlier and easier, so please get out and vote.
And there's been a steady stream of people while we've been here. We've only been here sort of 5-10 minutes and there's been a few come through already, so people are taking advantage of it.
It's been great. It's going to be a busy booth and it started off by being busy, and I've certainly been urging a lot of people and letting people know that early ordinary voting is available because it's just so convenient, so easy for people to do. If you're in town, then think about actually voting early, get it over with, don't get in a panic on election day when you realise help at 6 o'clock and I've been so busy all day, haven't voted.
Let's talk about the Stadium Southland. You've made comments in other media and in social media that you thought it was a bit miserly, that contribution. Surely $2 million's not bad.
Well, $2 million was the personal contribution made by local businessman Louis Crimp. I expected the government to do better, and there is certainly precedent for that, because Labour gave a donation of $1 million to the original stadium and the building cost of that was 11 million. Now this stadium, for very, very good reasons that we all know, extra building strengthening, building for the future, building for an international and a New Zealand-wide class stadium, costs $43.5 million. I would have expected to see a government contribution between $3 and $4 million.
Genetic modification in farming brings better outcomes faster, and a debate on science, not emotion, is needed to give farmers a choice, according to Southland Federated Farmers President Russell McPherson. Recently returned from the United States, he says the Federation could lead the discussion on GM and says smart science is smart business that reaps faster rewards than traditional farming techniques.
Instead of taking a generation, it could actually be done in 2 or 3 years. So a scientist can manipulate the genetics to actually have a better outcome for our environment. And the classic one is in our community at the moment, or in our farming community, using of HT Swedes, which has been a swede crop that's been not genetically modified, but it's been selected, that's got herbicide tolerance, and it's probably taken 20 or so years to get to there. Under a GM regime, you could do it in 2 or 3 years.
And if we don't do it in the near future, will we be left behind as far as world standards of production goes, potentially?
Well, yes, potentially we have. We could become quite a museum, actually, for agricultural production. And, I mean, New Zealand farmers are actually always ahead of our game. We're the most efficient farmers in the world. But the risk is that we could be left behind. And, you know, and when we get left behind, that means not only farmers suffer, but our whole community suffers, because our wealth and jobs are based on agriculture.
What would you like to see happen?
I'd just like to see that debate actually happen in our communities, in our nation, and based on science, not emotion. And look, GM's it's not mad scientists taking genetics away from putting animal genetics into plant genetics and vice versa. It's about just using plant genetics to speed up the process.
If genetic modification was enabled in New Zealand, how would it affect organic production?
Well, I think actually there's room for both organic and GM production, and it's all about good neighbour policy. You know, you wouldn't plant a GM crop beside your organic farmer, and it's a bit like a bull breeder or bull rearer doesn't put bulls beside a dairy farmer's cows.
Do you feel there's a lack of knowledge amongst farmers in New Zealand about potentially what it could mean to the industry?
Yeah, I think they are. I think I was quite a sceptic before I went and saw some stuff in America, and I was thinking, well, no, New Zealand's probably better off without GM. But I actually have come home thinking we need to have the debate. What I saw in America, the environment is actually the biggest winner out of this. You know, less spraying, less cultivation. When they're producing corn, they have been losing up to 80 pound of sediment per acre. Under a GM regime, 20 pounds per acre. So there's less sediment going into the rivers. That's to me, that's smart environmentally. Less spraying, so that you're not killing friendly insects and stuff that you don't want to kill. So under GM, so there's win-win for everybody.
Stay with us after the break. The new milk season is underway and it's waste audit times with kids at Newfield Kindergarten. Welcome back. The start of spring this week heralds the start of New Zealand's milk season, and at its peak in 2 months' time, a Fonterra tanker will collect milk from a farm every 9 seconds. The peak of the milk production cycle has potential to reach more than 90 million litres of milk collected in a single day. That's enough to fill 36 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Climatic conditions and grass growth will peak production in coming months, and last season more than 41% of Fonterra's total milk production was collected during the peak period. Fonterra have invested in more than 50 capital and enhancement projects around the country aimed at optimising collection, processing, transport and manufacturing, including three new plants to be installed at its Edendale site in Southland. The 2014-15 season is looking positive for New Zealand sheep and beef farmers, according to Beef and Lamb New Zealand. Economic Services have released analysis that predicts average sheep and beef before tax profits to climb 8% on last season. A 6.3% lift in sheep revenue is largely responsible for the increase. Favourable climatic conditions, expected higher product prices and a more export-friendly dollar are behind predictions in the new season outlook for 2014-15. Farm gate prices for lamb and mutton are forecast to average $103 to $79 per head respectively. That's up $3 on last year's provisional prices. Processed mutton exports are forecast to drop 21% over the coming year, mainly due to larger numbers of ewes being processed last year due to dry conditions. It was a waste morning at Newfield Kindergarten as the keen young environmentalists were helped with their waste audit by Environment Southland's Pat Hoffman. The kindergarteners put aside its rubbish for a week, and today it was time to separate items for weighing and recycling.
They're doing a waste audit. So Newfield is an Enviro Schools kindergarten, and they already have very good environmental practices. But today they want to find out exactly how much waste they're producing as a centre, and they want to know what sorts of waste they're generating so that they can make plans for the future and set themselves some targets. It all sounds very grand. The children are learning about what waste is, and the teachers are really the ones who will do the measuring and setting of targets for the future. Yeah.
And they were all very enthusiastic, weren't they? I mean, they were all participating.
Oh, they were, yes. I mean, children love to be hands-on, don't they? They love to be involved, and managing waste is a real-world activity. It's things that adults do, and children love to do things that adults do. So really fun to see their energy this morning. We want them to learn about good practices, but we also want them to understand why. so we're very lucky in Invercargill that we've got a good waste collection, waste management system, and children need to learn how to use that system. But we also want them to understand the bigger picture of waste management in the world. So it's wonderful that we can recycle plastic here in Invercargill. Not every town is able to do that, but it's important to understand why. And also to know that reducing our plastic use, for example, is even better than recycling. And they seem to have that. They seem to know that. The children mentioned that as I was talking to them.
It's all around us here, isn't it? I'm seeing compost experiments. There's a notice on the wall behind us saying, plastic takes 1,000 years to break down. So the kids are seeing this all the time.
They are. This kindergarten's great. They have a compost heap. They've got a worm farm, and they know the difference between what goes in a compost heap and what goes in a worm farm. They've got a goose paper box, and that's for paper that's still good on one side, so they can use it again. They know what goes in the yellow bin for recycling, what goes in the red bin for landfill. So, all the elements are here for a successful waste management.
And of course they're like little environmental envoys, aren't they? Because they go home and say, Dad, no, don't throw that bottle there, or, the message is being taken home as well.
They do, and often the teachers tell stories about, parents come in and describe what the children said at the dinner table, and they do share with their families what they're learning.
There's been plenty of on-court action at Invercargill Stadium Southland this week with the South Island Secondary School's netball competition on in the city. 76 teams from around the South Island took part in this year's tournament as it returns to Invercargill after a 7-year break. Verdon College players dominated the tournament for a number of years, but this year, of the 12 local teams competing, it was Southland Girls High School, coached by Natalie Avellino, who made it to the semi-final playoffs against South Otago High School after a 5th placing last year. And that's all from us this Thursday. Sport follows the weather next from the news team. Good night.